All right, my friends, today is another edition of I React to Your Hot Takes, in which you gave me your hot takes and controversial opinions, and I will give you my reaction to them. We've got quite a few good ones today, so let's check it out. First one here, Dre 310. That seems like it would be a Bay Area rapper from the 2000s. He says, Green Day only have 2 good albums, Dookie and American Idiot. The other stuff is boring as fuck. I do not agree with this one at all. I think Green Day does have a lot of what I would say pretty mid stuff, mid to just straight up bad. For example, Uno Dos Tre is horrible. I'm sorry, I love Green Day, but it's horrible. But, that's sort of the lowest point of their career. Yeah, after Nimrod, it got bad for a while. I agree with that. They did have a little bit of a low period, but Dookie, obviously a complete classic. American Idiot, also a complete classic. But even if they only had one other good album, it would be Kerplunk, which is amazing. This album, I think this album is fucking great. I don't know what the opinion is on Kerplunk, but I think this album is almost as good as Dookie. In some ways, it's better. I mean, it sounds basically exactly like Dookie, but just with less good production. I think it's amazing. This album is great. And I gotta say, I think their new shit is actually pretty good. Their new shit is pretty damn good. This sounds fucking good. This is their song from a couple weeks ago. It sounds damn good, man. Yeah, especially from a band that's been around since the 80s. And then there's like Nimrod and Warning, which I don't think are like their best work by any means, but I don't think they're bad. I think that this is a little bit of a contrarian take. I think you're trying a little bit too hard. I think Green Day have 3 albums that are just absolutely god tier, which is Kerplunk, Dookie, and American Idiot. Those are all like untouchable 10 out of 10 god tier classics. And then I think they have a few other albums that are like probably, A tier or B tier. Like Nimrod, Warning, and the new one. And then they have a couple that are like pretty shitty, like the Uno Dos Tre trilogy is pretty bad. But yeah, I do not agree with you. I think I think you're trying a little bit too hard on that one. That's what I think. Now here's a controversial take. Nights in Arizona says sitting down to wipe is weirder than standing up. And I have a confession to make, people. I have a confession to make. Until I was maybe like 11 or 12, I think, I wiped standing up because I didn't know any better. Nobody ever told me. Oh, we've got some standers in the chat. Wow, we've got some standers. Nobody ever told me you're already sitting down. I know, it makes more sense. Now, even though I have a past as a stander, I will admit to that. Okay, this is me coming clean. I have a past as a stander, okay? But I was a child. I didn't know any better. Now, the question, though, is sitting down to wipe is weirder than standing up. But it's not weird, and I'll tell you why. Mashing Dookie pancakes between your cheeks. What's wrong with people? Now, think about this mechanically, though, okay? Now, if you want to wipe standing up, listen, it's a free country. You can do what you want. As far as I know, Obama has not banned standing up to wipe, so I think you're free to do it. But just mechanically, you think about it, it's harder to see if you're clean, if you're sitting. I don't know how, like when you stand up, are you able to like look over your shoulder and into your ass? Like how is it easier to see if you're standing up? Mechanically, if you're sitting down, the cheeks spread as you sit, right? And it gives you, let's say right here is the anus. The cheeks spread and it gives you really easy access to the anus. Whereas when you stand up, the cheeks close again and it becomes just mechanically more difficult to wipe. So this is the first time I've heard of wiping while sitting. I'm shocked. I'm appalled. I don't know what planet you guys are on, but listen, if you want to wipe standing up, you can, but I'm not on board with it, people. You know what? I'm going to judge. I think if you wipe standing up, you're sick. You need help. That's what I think. Do you got to like lift the ball sack? What? I'm not going to explain how to wipe your ass, buddy. I'm not going to explain. Go look it up on WikiHow. There must be a WikiHow on how to wipe your ass. Go look it up there. Next one we have here from Chaotic Gale Surge says racist, homo, and transphobic Conservative rockers are posers. Rock music always had an edge in challenging the traditional ways while building a community of outsiders, and when musicians like Kid Rock and Ronnie Radke are resisting and spreading hate, they ruin the scene. So I have a little bit of a different take on this. I don't think that there are enough people who represent what he's describing here. Like, how many racist, homophobic, transphobic, and conservative rockers are there? There's like hardly any, right? It's like a vanishingly tiny number of people who even fit this description. So how could that be true if there's like, I mean, how many like vocally conservative rock musicians even are there? Like, I literally can't think of one other than like Phil from All That Remains, who's like, I would call like a libertarian. He's not really conservative. I don't really think there are any, or not enough to matter. Now, where I do kind of agree is that I think that there's a lot of, let's say, I'll use a woke word here. Okay, I'm going to use a woke. This is where, in my comments, people either call me like a bootlicking Trump supporter, or they call me like a woke libtard. I get both of them, which is great. Trapped, Stained, Iced Earth, Megadeth. Yeah, okay, there's a few. You're right. There's a few, but it's like these irrelevant butt rock bands. But there are a few. Fair enough. So I'm going to use a very woke word here so that everyone in the comments can call me a woke libtard. I think that there's a lot of unconscious bias in the rock scene. A lot of that. I think there's a lot of unconscious bias and internalized racism in the rock scene, meaning what I have noticed is if I do a video about anything other than a white man with a guitar, the views are horrible and the comments are bad. Like if there's a black person in the thumbnail or there's a woman in the thumbnail, it very rarely gets views. And the comments are like almost always bad. If there's like a black person in the band, they always sort of like, you know, get called rap rock, even if they're not rap rock. And like, you know, there's a lot of that. Like people in the rock scene are just sort of not willing to listen to music. Obviously, it's not all of them. And like, I don't think it could be the algorithm, but the algorithm is based on the people, right? The algorithm serves you what you want. The algorithm is based on your behavior. And rock fans do not like, basically, they don't like consuming things that aren't made by white men. I don't think that they even know that about themselves, right? And it's also not unique to them. I think in general, there's what you could call like me-ism, which is that people in general tend to want to engage with other people who are like them. For example, like if you look at a company like Amazon or Microsoft, the managers there who are Indian or Chinese, which like in tech, there's a giant number of Indian and Chinese people. The Indian managers tend to hire a lot of Indians and the Chinese managers tend to hire a lot of Chinese people. I don't think they're racist necessarily. I think it's just sort of a natural human tendency for people to kind of favor people who are like them. So I don't know that it's racist, but I don't think it's good for the scene. Let's put it that way. It's especially not good for the scene in the current sort of era in which if your whole scene is composed of straight white men, I think that's going to put you very sort of at odds with pop culture in general. Because diversity, and I mean real diversity, I don't mean like the bullshit kind that, you know, your job makes you sit through like a boring ass presentation about diversity. I mean like real diversity. The world is increasingly more diverse. And if your scene is only full of like straight white men, I think you're kind of going to be left out in the cold, right? I mean, think about what portion of pop culture, especially music in general, what portion of pop culture and music is driven by black people, women, and queer people. A fucking huge amount of it, right? A huge, huge, huge amount of it. Black people, women, and queer people are, I would argue, probably like the most dominant cohort of people that drive pop culture, right? And if your scene is just a bunch of like angry white dudes with guitars, you kind of don't really fit in. And so you're kind of going to get pushed off into this little box. You know, you're just going to kind of become irrelevant. And what kind of kid, if you're like a young person who values diversity, which I think almost all young people do, and you look out at a show and you just see like a sea of white men and everyone on stage is like a white man, you're going to be like, I don't know if this is really what I'm looking for. And so I don't agree with this person that like, I don't think that, you know, people like Kid Rock or whatever other conservative rockers, I don't think they're ruining the scene. I think the unconscious bias of rock fans where their default reaction is to reject things that aren't made by white men, I think that is the bigger issue. And I think that rock will become increasingly kind of siloed off in its own little thing if rock fans continue to sort of have this like instant negative reaction to anything that's not made by white men. Next one from the Preacher Man, Dustin Harris, local church enjoyer. He's got a few here. I want to touch on this one. Sum 41's metal influence made them a better band, and Chuck is severely underrated. Let's check that out. This is the album where they really went metal. They always had kind of a little bit of metal influence, but this is the one where they really, really, really went hard on it. Very metallic, right? This is going to be an opinion where I think I'm at odds with the rest of the world, but I do not personally care for Sum 41's metal stuff. Yeah, they went from being a stand-up pop punk band to a completely generic and forgettable metal band. I agree with that. That's what I think. And it's very interesting to me that the way that a band becomes credible, you know, and has like a legacy is to go more metal. It's like the only way that you can become, you know, regarded as like real art in the rock scene is to go more metal. Like Propagandhi is another example of this. I don't get it. The metal stuff is fine, but if I want to listen to thrash metal, you know, I'm going to listen to like Believer or, you know, Anthrax or Slayer or something. I'm not going to listen to Sum 41 playing, you know, sort of watered down thrash metal personally. I think they do it well, but yeah, I think that their pop punk stuff is by far the best stuff. Yeah, Post Malone played About a Girl and the metal scene started loving him. Exactly. He wore a Megadeth shirt. He's cool now. Yeah, I'm not on board. I'm an enjoyer of Sum 41's pop punk material. Their metal stuff, I could live without, personally. Next one from Corey Carmichael says, the more I focus on my mental health and relationships, the less interested and connected I feel to metal music. Well, listen, I've talked about this before, and I especially feel it now. I've talked about this before, but it just really continues to be more true for me every year. You know, the fact of the matter is that nobody gets into metal because everything's okay. Right? Like, you don't get into Infinite Annihilator and Cannibal Corpse, or even hardcore for that matter, like Death Threat or Hatebreed or whatever. You don't get into this stuff because everything's okay. Like, why do you resonate with these kind of like really dark lyrics, right? There's a couple reasons. So this kind of like dark imagery and like anger, like all these emotions, there's a couple reasons why it might resonate with you. Number one might be because you grew up in a fucked up house and you're like an angry person. Like, you identify with this stuff because you are also angry. That was the case for me when I was younger, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you would hope that you grow out of that as you grow older, right? Like, you don't want to be like that angry, you know. And I was 13 or 14 years old, I thought nobody understood me and the world was wrong, and, you know, I didn't like authority figures and all that kind of stuff that a lot of typical, you know, kids are into. And so, you know, I gravitated towards like, you know, punk and hardcore and stuff like that. You know, it's not that I dislike that stuff now, but, you know, I'm an adult, and like that sort of like really black and white view of like me against the world doesn't really resonate with me anymore. And then when it comes to stuff like this, like Infinite Annihilator, where this stuff is like legitimately disgusting, it's like, if you think these lyrics are cool, there's something wrong with you. This is like actually disturbing stuff. And if you're into this, like there's something actually wrong with you, and maybe you need help. There's another aspect of it here, which Morgoth Beats says, sometimes the musicianship, especially with the guitar playing, can be very interesting as a teenager. This is the third reason, is autism. And I'm not joking. Like, there is an actual, like, there are studies about this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is on PubMed. This is not like some blogger making an opinion. Basically, this is somebody has done a study suggesting that people who are into extreme music like punk and metal and stuff like that tend to like exhibit autistic characteristics. And for a lot of them, the sort of like intense nature of this music is basically stimming. And then when it comes to things like fetishizing technique, the way that metal people do, this like hyper fixation on technique and tone and stuff like that, those are very like spectrum-y type of behaviors, right? And none of this is to say like, oh, if you like metal, you're a bad person and you come from a fucked up house and you're autistic and all these other value judgments. None of that. But I do think it's a pretty normal thing that as you get older, you don't necessarily want to listen to like angry stuff. You don't relate to this sort of like feeling of alienation and anger at the world that maybe you did when you were younger. And the autism thing, you know, that's, I mean, I'm almost certainly on the spectrum, as probably anyone who's interacted with me can tell you. So I get that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not autistic, then, you know, fetishizing over technique and stuff probably just makes you go like, yeah, that guy can play really fast, but I don't care. That's not interesting to me. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty normal thing. As you get older, your mental health gets better. You know, you have better relationships. Maybe you no longer identify with Cannibal Corpse and Infinite Annihilator. I think that's pretty normal. Next one from Alex Tombstone. Not too much for you, Finn, but I'll say probably people hating the term baddiecore, and baddiecore artists probably just hate women and reflect it through musical opinion. I mean, I've talked about this a million times, but I completely agree with this. I mean, we've seen the reaction of like in every genre of music, things that are popular with young women tend to get a negative reaction from, you know, the people who determine what real music is. Meaning this, meaning guys that look like this. This is the guy who determines what real music is. And these kind of people, they hate anything that's popular with young women. That's not just a music thing either, in my experience. Yeah, that's totally true too. Absolutely. It's not limited to music at all. You look at like movies, like Twilight is a great example. Like people like hated on Twilight so much. I've never seen Twilight. I don't know if it's good or not. It's probably not good, but you know, I'm not angry about it. I'm not going to go out of my way to talk shit about Twilight. But you see this with music, of course, not just limited to metal, you know, going back to like the Beatles and Justin Bieber, like anything that's popular with young women will get a lot of hate from these kind of people. And so with baddiecore, meaning bands like Sleep Token and Bad Omens and Spirit Box and Lorna Shore and other bands where, you know, you see these hot girls on TikTok making thirst trap videos with these songs that's driving the popularity of these bands. How do you think this fucking autistic virgin incel loser in this image here, how do you think he feels about it when he sees some hot girl dancing to Bad Omens? What do you think? How do you think he feels about it? Probably not a big fan. If you can't relate to the taste of young women, your ability to judge what will do well in culture is non-existent. That's a fact. If you are out of sync with what young women like, then you do not have your finger on culture, and you never will, and that's okay. But you should probably just excuse yourself from the conversation. So I think this is totally right. Like, if you don't like Bad Omens, that's cool. Like, you don't have to like Bad Omens. But the people who like go out of their way to like aggressively hate on it, I absolutely think that that is sort of reflective of them, you know, maybe not liking women all that much. If you hate on baddiecore, you might be an insult. That's what I think. I think people hate on anything that becomes super popular and therefore by default is liked by a lot of women, has not much to do with women. No, but I don't think that's true, because there's lots of things that are super popular. For example, NFL football, Star Wars, Call of Duty. You don't see these people hating on that stuff because this shit is for men. Things that are equally popular but are mostly only popular with men don't enrage these people. They're extra enraged by things that are popular with young women. So I don't think it's a coincidence. Nobody hates on COD. Of course they do. Of course they do. Exactly. But they hate on the female streamers that play those games. That's what it is. Of course people hate on COD, but they go out of their way to hate on the women that play the game. That's what I'm talking about. Their rage becomes intensified when women are involved. That's what it is. Okay, last one from Nick Fang. Early 90s was the big bang of all subcultures within music, death, black grind, and all subgenres of techno and hip hop. Gen X is the greatest contribution to culture. You know, let's put it this way. I am a Gen Xer, so I'm obviously biased, but I gotta agree that the early 90s kind of were the template for so much of what we think of as like culture now. For example, you know, like basically metal as we know it was invented in the 90s. I mean, even Meshuggah, even like more modern styles of music like Gent, you know, that came from the 90s. That's when rap got good. I kind of agree. I mean, even with like movies like Natural Born Killers and Kill Bill and Reservoir Dogs and all that stuff really sort of set the tone for movies. Yeah, Pulp Fiction, exactly. So I'm not one to like say that like, oh, back in my day everything was better, because I don't think that's true. I think a lot of stuff from back then doesn't necessarily hold up now. Like I wouldn't necessarily go back and watch or listen to all that stuff. But I think as far as what he's saying here is the greatest contribution to culture, I do think that part is true. I think the early 90s really were the beginning of like modern pop culture as we know it, where things started to get like dark and gritty, and we dropped all the kind of like phony contrived stuff of the 80s. I think that's when things started to get real. So yeah, I agree with you, Nick. I think you're right. Gen X supremacy. I agree with you. I'm on board with that. That does it for this edition of I React to Your Hot Takes. Thank you to everybody who contributed, and I will see you next time that Twitter wants to get very, very angry at me. Do you got to like lift the ball sack? What? I'm not going to explain how to wipe your ass, buddy.